Now, like most people, my first interaction with Five Nights at Freddy's was with the original game. Just like in the movie, it revolves around an employee trying to survive 5 nights on the security shift at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, a spooky parallel to the real-life Chuck E. Cheese. The creator of Five Nights at Freddy's had previously been criticized for video games where his characters were said to look like creepy animatronics. This inspired him to create a game specifically about creepy animatronics, and despite its very simple premise and controls, it ended up becoming a worldwide phenomenon, leading to the eventual cinematic movie adaptation. I personally loved the first game, and it was one of the few more modern games I played after losing interest in gaming overall at the end of the Nintendo GameCube era. Five Nights at Freddy's was something I tried because of just how simple it was and how scary people said it was. It was a game that anyone could play and have fun with, and just test out how far they could get instead of needing to actually beat the game to get the experience like more complex video games. Because of how simple it was, people could easily introduce new friends to it and also give them a quick experience, making it something countless people have tried and been scared by and had fun playing without having to invest entirely in the franchise. Despite my interest in that first game, I didn't find myself nearly as scared in the sequels, or honestly focused enough to learn the new mechanics that were added to the games. And because of that, I didn't think too much about Five Nights at Freddy's again until the recent movie came out. Now, the game was presented as rather simple both in story and its mechanics, but in the background there were hints at something a lot more elaborate. So when the movie got picked up for a cinematic adaptation, there was ample background material to help fill out the story. I don't pretend to know all of the lore of the games and books, but from what I understand, the movie kind of goes in its own direction with the premise and remixes the characters and ideas with a focus on Mike as a security guard who takes up the job in order to support his young sister, with their parents having tragically passed away. The movie got very negative reviews from critics, but has had rather high audience ratings across various websites, which isn't surprising considering the fan base for Five Nights at Freddy's. While industry critics were hoping for some sort of horror film that played off of their own childhood fears of uncanny animatronics, the game had already delivered on that to its fan base for almost a decade at that point, and what fans had come to love about the franchise had really changed. From here, I will be discussing heavy spoilers for the movie and the games in order to better explain how the fanbase has evolved around the franchise, so turn back now if you don't want to be spoiled. However, this video is more of an attempt to give information not just to people in the Five Nights at Freddy's fanbase, but to people who, like me, are more so on the outside of it, who want to understand why the movie made some of the choices that it did. What this movie did that I think upset a lot of normies who might go see it is put heavy focus on the newly created child character, the little sister Abby. She is more than just some adorable sibling for the older brother to want to save, however, and is actually one of the more realistic attempts at portraying a troubled young child. Mike is a well-meaning brother, but he has his own trauma from his other sibling, Garrett, being abducted when he was younger and when he was supposed to be watching him. And following the loss of their parents, he's not even sure if he's the right person to take care of his younger sister, with there being an aunt who wants full custody of her. Abby has been through a lot, and to cope, she has her own imaginary world and imaginary friends, with an intense focus on expressing what she has experienced in her mind in artistic drawings. While this is something that's been seen a bit in other horror films exploring a very similar family premise, it manages to ring as more sincere in an adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's, a rare case where I would say such a trope has more soul in a franchise than from a smaller or even indie film, which can fall just as easily to the negative use of tropes to try and fluff out its story. But here in the Five Nights at Freddy's feature-length film, it actually feels like there is heart in that character. You see, Five Nights at Freddy's was not, as a video game, aimed at young children in particular, but instead gained popularity both with children and adults because it was featured by popular YouTubers looking for different games to play for their large audiences. Five Nights at Freddy's provided some legitimately fun jump scares for any gamer to experience that allowed them to show off their own hilarious reactions over and over again as scary animatronics jumped out at them. This appealed to a lot of adults who also found the game creepy and their streamers of choice entertaining, but it appealed a lot more so to younger audiences and people who had generally shown interest in more kid-friendly content even at an older age. Again, despite Five Nights at Freddy's not really being aimed at children in particular and having more dark adult material. This was a cross-section of some older people who could sort of lead the fandom by creating additional content online for other adults like themselves, but which also undeniably attracted the attention of endless children. Many of these children had limited other entertainment options, with the YouTube app on a cell phone being considered more than most of the adults today had as kids, with our most advanced tech for a lot of my childhood just being a Game Boy Color. The closest we got to the endless hours of free content on YouTube that people have of any given franchise today was being able to buy 1 or 2 whole episodes of Sonic X to watch in extremely low quality on the eventual Game Boy Advance, but even by then I was in middle school. While there is constant talk about how we need to secure even the YouTube Kids app to be more safe, the YouTube Kids app itself is still criticized for not being safe enough for kids, and even with all the restrictions it provides to try and create safe content for kids, there are still seemingly endless millions of very young children still using the regular YouTube app with the blessings of their parents. Five Nights at Freddy's had its appeal with adults, giving it plenty of adults to make the fandom content, their reactions and theories, and even weird animations and such that you see all over YouTube. And the children with the YouTube app managed to drive up the views to insanely high numbers. Its appeal with kids was similar to its appeal with adults, with the animatronic Freddy and his other creepy sidekicks reminding kids of Chuck E. Cheese animatronics, with most kids in this generation really only experiencing them secondhand through Chuck E. Cheese commercials, and my own generation already being programmed to find them creepy thanks to the spooky animatronic sequence from the theatrical Goofy movie. Five Nights at Freddy's still had some gruesome adult content as we had discussed, but because of its colorful mascots, it somehow managed to just escape getting too much criticism from adults. More recent generations are a lot more lenient with what they allow their children to watch, with many adults remembering what content they saw as a kid and remembering what scared them or not, and even just how easy it was to get over something and back away from content that was too scary. When I was a kid, a family show was something like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, a cheesy sitcom where the kids mostly focused on the talking cat, but these days I know people who grew up watching The Walking Dead every week with their parents. Five Nights at Freddy's, despite its more adult elements, managed to become something closer to what Goosebumps was for my generation, an early attempt in book and TV form to let children have horror that was specific to them, with the cheesy animatronic theme ultimately painting the franchise as cheesy enough for kids to safely entertain as fantasy violence, the same way the bright-colored suits of Power Rangers allowed it to get away with more intense action without leaning into themes of media considered too violent for children. It even went on to get its own set of books published for kids by Scholastic, just like Goosebumps. And over the course of a decade, that led to an evolution in what people love about Five Nights at Freddy's. And ultimately, the Five Nights at Freddy's film was going to be aimed at this very large, very monetizable fandom, and not so much at the general public the way feature films like the recent Sonic the Hedgehog have been. In the film, the young sister Abby is a reflection of not every single fan in every single way, but a reflection of the type of fan so many of them are in terms of how important these imaginary characters become to them. Five Nights at Freddy's is essentially an entire world to a lot of its fans, one where you are lured in with the promise of being creeped out, and then are led down this sort of esoteric mystery initiation where you get the bigger story in different pieces in different ways, whether from the official material or the larger world of fan works that constantly re-explain it. By the end of this transformation, the fans are not the scared little children many of them were when they started, but rather maturing teens and adults who know these pizzerias so well that they can wander entire labyrinths with other fans discussing the lore hidden in every corner. But like with a lot of fandoms, many of the people who make it this far into the Five Nights at Freddy's maze are using it to escape issues in their real life. This is something discussed a lot, but I think people have a tendency to imagine it in the way that Abby's portrayed in the film, as someone responding to an extra intense trauma such as losing your parents while already being a bit different. Abby is a purposely dramatic example, but she emphasizes how a lot of young people feel even when they don't have this level of trauma in their lives, and it's something the film continues to explore with her relationship to her brother. At the end of the day, growing up isn't some perfect experience, and no matter what level of luxury you have, growing up is more so about you adjusting to the limits that exist inherently in life, regardless of the level of luxury that you can get. And when people are struggling with certain things that are lacking in their life that other people are not able to address or fix for them, they tend to turn to escapist fantasy. The free access to nearly endless content on YouTube, and thus lots of communities around the web to talk about Freddys further, made the franchise something that people could enjoy extensively without ever actually having to pay for anything. These characters went from horrifying monsters to silly and colorful friends living in a horror-themed world that helped young people deal with the particular horrors that they were facing in real life that most people are never able to even verbalize because our society doesn't even equip us with the terminology and information most people need to understand why they have certain fears and anxieties about what we think of as normal parts of society. With that in mind, the film has Abby taken by Mike to camp out at the pizzeria, and instead of becoming the immediate victim of the animatronics, she actually becomes their friend. For people who aren't a fan of the franchise inherently, this might have felt like the inclusion of Chris in Sonic X, an unnecessary human character who was placed into existing Sonic the Hedgehog stories from the games in order to make kids feel like they had someone they could proxy into and relate with, something most Sonic fans didn't really want or end up enjoying. But for someone who even has just skimmed the surface of the Five Nights at Freddy's fandom after enjoying the game, it allows for rather dark commentary on the fandom itself. Abby is enthralled to have magical animatronic friends, and we learn that these animatronics are in fact the souls of children themselves, powering the machines. Like within the games and books, this comes with the dark backstory of these children being killed by the man who owns Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, and him hiding the bodies in the machines. The children want to be good, but while in the animatronics, they are metaphysically under the control of the man who murdered them, and are also drawn by the blindness of their own limitations. What they want is for Abby to become like one of them, seemingly as a new friend in their group, but this would involve killing her. Where the story gets its most dark and perhaps its most relatable to the audience is the moment where her older brother actually decides to let that happen. Throughout the movie, the older brother Mike is wrestling with whether or not he should be the one taking care of his sister, wondering if perhaps his aunt would be a better choice. This is an echo of Mike's fear that history will repeat itself, that he will somehow end up losing Abby the way he lost his brother Garrett, who he cared for deeply. Years back, Mike's mother asked him to watch Garrett while they were camping, and when Mike wasn't looking, Garrett was abducted and never found, only much later being revealed to be one of the victims of the owner of Fazbear's Pizza. With his mother now dead herself, Mike fears that he will make a simple mistake like he did before, and that he will lose his sister like he lost his brother. And his desire to make up for what happened to his brother is something that blurs his priorities with his sister. Throughout the movie, he is haunted by dreams that ultimately lead to Mike being asked to give up his sister to become one of the missing children, and in return, he could get his brother back. In a very realistic moment of weakness, Mike gives in, having already been pulled apart layer by layer with the loss of his brother, the destruction of his family from that loss, and the eventual death of his mother and father. Mike immediately realizes that this isn't right, and even understands that he was in something of a dreamlike state, allowing the audience to more easily forgive him, but very few of them are truly able to forgive what Mike represented in that moment. As in real life, most people don't turn around and try to make up for the ways that they betray you. Mike's decision trades his sister so she can become one of the beloved animatronics that she has come to almost worship, the way fans can come to almost worship franchises like Five Nights at Freddy's at such a young age. Their ultimate fantasy is not just to become friends with these characters, but to become one of them. Despite this idyllic fantasy, the reality would involve Abby not just dying, but brutally being pushed into one of the machines, not just killing her body, but in a way, killing her soul by never allowing it to grow with her body. As one of these animatronics, she'd be with her friends forever, but she'd also never become a real adult, something she's struggling to do with her fantasies and imaginary friends. Of course, this isn't the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise trying to warn people to stay away from them or their fandom content, or trying to insult anyone who watches it. And instead, it's really just showing the growth that a lot of people experience through their fandoms, across all things loved, whether commercial and modern, or religious and ancient. This franchise, like most, is ultimately escapism for large numbers of people, and with that there is always those who invest so heavily in their fantasy worlds that they never grow beyond them, clinging to childhood ideas of fun to avoid becoming an adult. Her brother, however, traded her into this for him to not just release himself from the anxiety of having to raise her, but to satiate his guilt over what happened to his brother in the past. The audience understands why Mike would succumb to this, but in real life there is rarely this noble aspect to this sort of betrayal. Mike's betrayal is what leads to Abby nearly becoming one of the dead children, the selfish part of his choice resonating with audience members who have felt wronged by the people in their life who are supposed to be taking care of them, who have perhaps done their best but have also failed in certain ways and made the person retreat back into the safe spaces of fandoms and fantasies. Chillingly represented by Abby in the film being betrayed by her brother to become one of these animatronics. The idea behind the early parts of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is that people betray you, but franchises don't. Franchises just create a fun world to play in, but by the end of the movie, we can see that while the humans are the more flawed ones on the surface, they are the ones who can forgive and who you can work things out with in the end. Even if people can't do that with the exact other people in their life at that moment, the way Abby and Mike eventually do. The end of the movie has Mike saving his sister Abby and them escaping the horror of the pizzeria, while Freddy and the other animatronic children turn on their killer and get the revenge for what he did to them and almost had them do to Abby to have her join them. Freddy ends up maintaining his sanctity as a mascot not just for the franchise, but for the fans themselves. Someone who has become a friend despite their dark origins, and who has evolved to try and help its fans in the ways that it can, by continuing to create a world that is for them, but, like with this film, helps them explore why they are there instead of just sucking them into harm like the animatronics almost did with Abby. And in the end, it reminds us that there comes a point where you have to leave that world behind and do your best to make things work with people in real life, even if it's not the people in your life at that moment. But what do you guys think? This was very new to me, and I know if I get some exact plot details wrong, some people might get upset, but I hope the analysis and breakdown of it resonated with some of you, as even as someone who has never really dived into the fandom myself, watching the movie felt very relatable, as you could switch out Freddy with a lot of different characters and get a similar outcome. A commentary on how we interact with not media, but with sort of comfort media in particular. Leave your opinions in the comments down below, and let me know what other media like this you'd like to see me break down here on Random Universe. See you guys next time.